May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our salvation. Amen. This past week, as I finished our course on heaven and hell, I was really quite amazed at the number of people interested in the subject. It must mean we're getting older or something, we think about that more and more. But there were a lot of people who came and wanted to know at least what I thought, if not what Scripture said. And it's a broad topic with narrow perspectives. That is, most people came with some kind of perception that they got somewhere, either from a Sunday school teacher or from some poster in a college dorm room or from some movie with an actress head spinning around or Dante's Inferno. We all come with this, and it's kind of an open book because we don't have any photographs or scientific images. But in the midst of that, as we come with our own images and understandings, what caught my attention most is how we cling to them, how we want to own them, and we become fearful, almost threatened when someone says, well, did you think about, or is there another way, or could it possibly be? Even when you read scriptures on that subject, you'll find some very interesting, contrasting descriptions. So we all like to, be that way. We like to kind of compartmentalize, and we like to understand, and we like to make things black and white, shut out, shut off, keep out, and keep in. Right? Because life it feels safer and more secure when we have a grip on it, or at least think we do. But the flip side of that is when we shut out, shut off, and shut in is that we become out of touch as well. We surround ourselves with a bubble, and then anything outside of us, when the bubble bursts, is a shock. You see, change is happening whether we like it or not. We can try to stop our lives, but the world continues to go on. Discoveries are made every day, scientific ones as well as just general sociological ones about humanity and human nature. Some of you may have seen that now with infrared and space satellites, they've discovered a Mayan civilization in Guatemala that they originally thought might have been 1 million people, and now they predict was over 10 million, and far more extensive than anyone could have ever imagined. Well, that changes all our thinking. That discovery has effects. And so, we become restless and anxious because if you're like me, we would like things to just be simple and safe and sound. But if I'm honest, I'm not so much against change, especially change I want, right? Because we're all that way. But a lot of times I'm against change. I don't want things to change, not because I'm against change, but because I'm lazy. Isn't that true? It's just lazy. I don't want to learn more. My granddaughter picked up a toy the other day. It looked like an old telephone. You remember what those were? A telephone? And she was talking into it, and I thought, wow, haven't seen anybody do that in a long time, right? I don't want it, I don't want to go through the work. My brain hurts. And so I become lazy and anti-change. because of a selfishness, I guess, within me. But if we didn't have change, where would we be? We would still be living on a flat planet, would we not? 25 years ago, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, and I discovered a couple people actually checked it out and read it. I was pretty excited about that. I wrote it on sacred space, on why is it and what is it, because it doesn't matter what culture, what part of the world you are, people have some kind of image of a power beyond themselves, and they have to consecrate it. And so why is it that certain places are designated as holy and other places aren't? So much so that even when cultures conquer cultures, they may destroy the church, but they build another church of their faith and tradition on the same spot. There's something about the spot that they see as holy and interpret it as holy and so forth. And so I wrote on that. And, people would stack stones, and then the stones become an altar, and then the altar becomes a tent, and then the tent becomes a tabernacle, and then the tabernacle becomes a temple. It's even biblical. The same thing happened. Abraham was a wanderer. Jacob, his grandson, encounters and wrestles with an angel, and he has to build an altar to that spot. When the Hebrews leave Egypt, they have an Ark of the Covenant. It carries the Ten Commandments. And so they mark the holiness, but it's changed because the holiness is not a particular spot, but it is a people on the move. They are led by that Ark of the Covenant, and it stays that way for generations until King David conquers Jerusalem, which was the capital and the religious center of people who lived there prior to them. And then he begins to build a city, which evolves into a temple, a great and magical temple where this is where God lives, nowhere else. This is our God and our place. And all of a sudden, the interesting evolution and all that is people cease to see God in all kinds of different places. They let go of the God who leads them with the Ark of the Covenant, and they become static. They hunker down, and they become static, and they become fixed. And then you have Jesus. And then you have Jesus. And who does Jesus continually butt heads with? The people who are all about the fixed static place. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin. He is always bumping heads with them. He goes to Jerusalem, but he doesn't stay at the temple. He believes in those things, but he believes more in a movement of the people. What is he criticized most often for? He eats with sinners and tax collectors. It's like the Apostle Paul. I became all things to all people. I'm not just satisfied with being here. And so Christianity spreads around the Mediterranean in different shapes and different forms and different ways of worshiping and understanding and preaching. Because the faith that we know is dynamic. Very biblical. As I said, you have Abraham who's called in Genesis, and Abraham is a wanderer, and God just says, I'm just going to lead you. And then you have Moses who leads the people in the desert. It is a God on the move. And while I'm on the subject of Moses, think about Moses' first encounter with this God, this Yahweh, this divine one. What was the vision? Fire. Fire. And fire is a fascinating image for God. Because fire is something that's always the same and always changing. It's an oxymoron, really. You can stare at a fire forever and you see the fire, and yet the fascination is in how it moves and it fluctuates. But Moses, he's not satisfied with that. He says, okay, God, but if I'm going to do this and I'm going to go back to Egypt, I'm going to talk to Pharaoh, I need your name. Give me a name. Now, in the ancient world, they believed that if you knew someone's name, you owned a part of them. Which makes sense, because if you're anonymous, nobody knows you, right? You can pretty much do anything you want. But if somebody knows you, I know who you are. I own a part of you. It says, God, give me a name. All the other gods have names. You have to have a name. And God says in most of our translations, I am who I am, which is really a non-answer. But in the Hebrew, it's far more powerful. Because in the Hebrew, God responds by saying, not I am who I am, I will be who I will be. It's dynamic. It's forward-looking. It's proactive. It's future tense. I will be who I will be. Do not lock me in. Let me, the creator of the universe, continue creating. Let me, the one who led you out of slavery, continue to lead you. And don't always ask me the definition, because I'm working with you and you're a tough lot. Give me a chance. You see? So when Jesus confronted people, it was usually the people who ceased trying to mold and shape individuals, but defend and protect the institution. No wonder he always got in trouble. No wonder he was silenced, because he challenged the frozen attitudes that had become a faith. And Jesus was about a flowing, ever-growing, ever-moving faith, one that sought to thaw the rigidity that evolved into a static faith and application to life. Rob Bell, one of the authors whose book we use for this class, some declare Rob Bell a heretic, others see him a theological freedom fighter. But he says something very interesting in the book we used, that at least something I found thoughtful and provoking. He said, as human beings, knowing our mortality and our limited knowledge, as human beings, we shape our image of God. But what we have to think about is the image we shape, or the image we create for understanding our God, then shapes and creates us. So if your God becomes a rigid, harsh, black and white, judgmental kind of God, that is going to shape you as well. But if your God is that I will be who I will be God, there is a dynamism, there is a recreation, there is a flow, there is fire. As I close my message this morning, as I conclude, I want to leave you with three thoughts, three quotations. Just think on them. Write them down, put them on your refrigerator, and just kind of ponder them. The first one is a sign on an old country road that said, "Beware, the ruts ahead go on for miles." Being from western Nebraska, I think I've seen that sign. The second is an observation obviously made by a mature individual who said that sometimes it takes a wrong turn to get to the right place. And the last is a saying of Jesus we're all familiar with: "Seek and you will find, knock and it shall be opened to you." All of which have risks, but lest we forget, doing nothing is pretty risky as well. So maybe the appropriate or ultimate title for this sermon should not be "What are you searching for?" but rather, "Are you still searching?" Are you still trying to learn, to grow, to expand, to listen, to trust, to evolve, to be led? Led by a God who says, "Don't worry, I will be with you. Don't worry, I will be who I will be." Because the world is in flux. We have far more new questions that don't seem to match our old answers. As the folk singer said, the times, they are a-changing. How faithfully fluid and flexible in response are we? Amen.